Hello everyone and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Stories about life in the Soviet Union. Здравствуйте, дорогие товарищи! В эфире программа Ushanka Show. In today's video we're going to talk about long-distance trucking in the Soviet Union. This topic was requested quite a bit by my viewers. This video is the part 2 of the Soviet trucking topic, and if you missed my first video, I'll provide the link in the comment sections below. And we're going to start with a quick lesson of the Russian language. Урок русского языка. Дальнобой. Дальнобой. Although it was not an official word, this is how most everyone was called in long-distance trucking. Дальнобой. This word дальнобой is interesting on its own. It's a combination of two words, дальний, long range, and бой, strike, дальнобой. Long range strike. That's how we called long range artillery, дальнобойная артиллерия. So that's where дальнобой came from дальнобойная артиллерия, long range artillery. And the long distance trucker was called дальнобойщик, дальнобойщик, the person performing long range strikes. Okay kids, so we're done with the Russian language lesson and we need to move on to the next lesson, the geography lesson. We need to talk about Soviet Union as a country. You probably all know, I truly hope you do know, that Soviet Union used to be the largest country in the world. Its size was 8.65 million square miles, which is about 1.5 times larger than United States. Soviet Union was spanning 11 time zones, and I remember when it was 3 p.m. or 1500 in Moscow, it was midnight on the other end of the country. But I think the best way to imagine the immense size of the Soviet Union is the flight time. So if you fly from Moscow, and it's not the edge of the Soviet Union, right? Because that was Brest in Belarus. But if you fly from Moscow to Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, which is the most eastern part of the Soviet Union, it will take you about 9 hours, 8.5 hours. If you fly from Moscow to New York, it's about 10 hours. So distance from other end of Soviet Union or the New York City, it's about the same distance for the Soviet Union side. Just imagine how huge that country was. The Soviet Union was so huge that even after the collapse of the USSR back in 1991, its main remnant, the Russian Federation, still remained the largest country in the world with 6.6 million square miles. And that's after losing Kazakhstan, the 9th country in the world by size, about 1 million square miles, and Ukraine, which is the size of a Texas. Russia still is the largest country in the world. But just like in the movie Shrek, I was repeating in my videos over and over again. Sure, Soviet Union was big, but look at its location. If you use a proper comparison map that utilizes not only the sizes of the continents or countries, but also their locations, and you overlap former Soviet Union, Russia with North America, you will see that Soviet Union and modern Russia was pretty much and still is oversized Canada. So for example, I live in the southwest corner of Michigan, and Michigan kind of considers the northern part of the United States. Well, if you compare Russian Federation or Soviet Union, the northern part of the United States is the most southern part of Russia and the Soviet Union. And if you look at this map, which is most suitable areas for human habitat, you could tell so probably almost 70% of the Soviet and modern Russia territory not really good for humans to live. So just like Canada, northern Canada, most of the Soviet Union territories didn't have really paved roads, and it was accessible only by railroad tracks, some places only by boat using the rivers or helicopters. That's why long-distance trucking really did not exist in the Soviet Union, especially in its eastern northern part. While I was researching for this video, I found this interesting comparison chart. So they're talking about грузооборот автотранспорта. So this is how many miles and tons of goods were moved by trucking. On the top line is USSR, Soviet Union. On the bottom is United States. So in 1970, the difference was almost 10 times the United States. Trucks were moved more goods than the Soviet Union. 101 billion ton kilometers versus 64.2 billion tons kilometers. And Soviet Union never caught up. In 1988, so it's almost at the end of the life of the Soviet Union, 143 billion ton kilometers in Soviet Union trucking versus 1045 billion. So that's a 1 trillion ton kilometers in the United States. So you see the difference, huge. So pretty much almost 10 times behind Soviet Union was on trucking part. Trains, probably a different story. I didn't research that, but you could tell for good trucking conditions, you need good roads, good network of gas stations, and plenty of population to support long-distance trucking. Okay, boys and girls, so we're done with the boring part of this video. We're done with the lesson of Russian language and lesson of geography, and now let's talk about long-distance trucking. Let's talk about дальнобой в Советском Союзе. As I mentioned in my previous video, there weren't many semi-trucks on the Soviet roads, and the semis that I usually saw, for example, in Kiev, in the capital of Ukraine, was this type of semis. It's MAZ truck that pulls a special trailer with the panels for the high-risers building construction. But the real long-distance truck in the Soviet Union was born back in 1968 when Sovtransavto was created. Actually, the very first long-distance trucking hub was organized in Moscow in 1963, but as the company, Sovtransavto was created in 1968 and it had several transportation hubs all over the country. Mostly was located in the large cities like Moscow, Leningrad, Kiev, Kharkov, Donetsk, and others. By early 1970s, around 300 semi-trucks were operated by Sovtransavto for the cross-border transportation, so it's a long-distance trucking going mostly to the other socialist countries. Fun fact, in the Russian language, semi-truck is called Сидельный тягач, so it could be translated as a saddle tractor. So just like you ride a horse in a saddle, the trailer rides the tractor like you ride the horse. So it's a седельный тягач, saddle tractor. Some of you maybe already begin wondering why the Soviet Union, Soviet government became interested in developing long-distance international trucking so late, only in the early 1960s. I believe that the trigger was creation of EEC, of European Economic Community, back in 1957. The Soviet Union already had something similar in place for its Eastern Bloc. It was called Comecon, Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, or SEV in Russian, Совет экономической взаимопомощи. It was created in January of 1949, but up to the early 60s it was pretty much dormant and not much was going on, like exchanging goods and equipment. Was mostly Soviet Union helping new socialist countries to recover after World War II. And I think it's important to remind everyone that Soviet Union always had a different railroad standards. Our railroad tracks spaced wider than the ones in Europe. So when you move goods by train from the Soviet Union to even Eastern Europe, you need to stop at the border and you need to move the whole thing below the train and switch it to the different tracks, which is extremely complicated process, especially if you move a lot of goods. So trucking, long distance trucking was the easiest way to start moving goods between Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. So let's talk about Soviet semi-trucks. So originally Sovtransavto was utilizing mostly MAZ 504 semi-trucks, седельные тягачи. It was manufactured at MAZ, Minsky Автомобильный завод, so it's a Minsk automotive factory. And that truck was manufactured between 1965 and 1977. So before 1965, Soviet Union really didn't have like cab-over semi-trucks. MAZ 504 had a 6-cylinder diesel engine with only 180 horsepower, so it wasn't powerful enough and pretty slow to move goods on the European roads. So in 1970, MAZ came up with a specific model designed for Sovtransavto, for international long-distance trucking, and it was called MAZ 504V, and it had an 8-cylinder diesel engine, so it was 200 horsepower, slightly more powerful, And that model, specifically for Sovtransavto, was manufactured between 1970 and 1982 for 12 years. Another Soviet-made semi-truck that was used for a short period of time by Sovtransavto was KAZ-608 Kolkhida. So that's a Kutaisi automotive factory that's located in Georgia. But that truck was so bad. It was poor quality, horrible fuel consumption because it has a gasoline engine and really underpowered. So a lot of truckers, they had this saying that ZAZ Zaporozhets, it's not really a car, and KAZ Kolkhida is not really a truck. And usually those trucks were like a punishment truck. So anybody who is a bad driver, or you have a new driver just arrived, you will get 608 to practice and to work on it because it was so bad no one else wanted to drive them. Sovtransavto was also using a truck from Czechoslovakia. The semi-truck was called Škoda 706 RTTN, and that was the best semi-truck you could get in the Soviet Union in the late 60s, early 70s. It was way more powerful, way more comfortable cab over, and usually it was used together with imported refrigerator trailer. As the Sovtransavto grew, they quickly came to realization that it's not economically feasible to utilize MAZ semi-trucks in Europe, especially in the Western Europe. They started doing long-distance trucking, going to the Western Germany, Netherlands, France, and MAZ trucks that weren't really reliable, and drivers were really good about fixing small things, but major breakdowns, no one could repair MAZ semi-trucks, so they had to be towed back all the way to the Soviet Union. So in 1973, Sovtransavto requested better trucks. The Soviet government looked around and they purchased a batch of Volvo semi-trucks, and decision to buy from Sweden was not only economical but also political because Sweden was a neutral country. So even if Mercedes-Benz semi-trucks were considered better trucks, for political reasons, Soviet government preferred to purchase Volvos. But Volvo dominance in Sovtransavto didn't last long. In the mid-1970s, there was the first batch of Mercedes semi-trucks purchased, and since then, the Mercedes-Benz semi-trucks became a workhorse for Sovtransavto in Western Europe. That's the only truck they used going to Germany and other countries because of the dealership network and repairs, and they were so reliable. So Mercedes-Benz became pretty much the main truck of Sovtransavto. By 1980, Sovtransavto operated 2,000 semi-trucks, and it became one of the largest trucking companies in the world, which is kind of not really surprising if you have the only company that does international trucking in the largest country of the world. It's not hard to become one of the largest trucking companies in the world. The situation with Sovtransavto reminds me of the situation with Aeroflot, which used to be the largest airline in the world, and we were really proud of that without thinking that Aeroflot was actually the only airline in the largest country in the world. So it wasn't that hard to become the largest airline in the world. Between 1980 and 1990, Sovtransavto business was booming. It was growing steadily. That means that Soviet Union was importing more and more goods while its own industry were slowly deteriorating. So it was good news for Sovtransavto, bad news for the Soviet Union. Well, so let's talk about Sovtransavto drivers, although they deserve to have a separate video or 2 or 10. So they definitely were the elites of the Soviet truck drivers, and KGB made sure of it. Sovtransavto utilized multi-stage system for their drivers. When you become a driver for Sovtransavto, first you'll be driving long distance only within the Soviet Union. It's mostly European parts, so it's cruising between Odessa, Kiev, Leningrad, Moscow, and so on. Then you'll be allowed to cross the border and go into socialist countries like Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and only in about 10 years, after 10 years working for Sovtransavto, they will allow you to go into the capitalist countries like Western Germany, Netherlands, or France. Every resume was vetted and checked by KGB, and if you wanted to be a driver and go across the border, you better be a member of Communist Party of the Soviet Union. You better be married and have no relatives beyond the USSR. That was the ideal candidates for traveling to other countries, because you have hostages at home, you have your wife and your children. But of course, for the drivers, it was all worth it because they had access to the foreign goods, to deficit, they had access to the foreign currency, they could try to smuggle goods out of the Soviet Union. And if you know your semi-truck and trailer, you probably knew some nicks and crannies that you could hide stuff from the customs, and you can bring home jeans and other items that people will pay crazy money for. So being a Sovtransavto driver was a prestigious job, and all of those guys were rich back home, but they were acting like a poor peasants while they were on the road in Western Europe. All the drivers received so-called per diem, right? So that's the money to live every day while you on the road. So they'll get hard currency to spend in a hotel and to spend on food. But of course, they all slept in the trucks, and they all brought food from home, and they cooked on the truck stops to save every penny, any precious foreign currency, so they could purchase jeans and other goods. So besides keeping of the trucking logbook, you write down your miles and all that stuff, Soviet drivers of Sovtransavto also had to keep these hard currency logbooks, what you see on this cover. So this book, Knizhka, that's where you write down and verify how many currency you received from your employer, how much currency you brought back. So Soviet government was really sensitive about moving hard currency across the border, and they tried to keep in track on it extremely carefully. So as you see on these pages, and in the end of this video, I'll play again all these pictures so you can pause and read and see what's going on. But even like 4 Deutschmarks had to be written down and signed and stamped by the custom officer. Well, my friends, that's all I have for you today. If you have more questions, if you want to learn something else about Sovtransavto or its drivers, please post your questions in the comment sections. Definitely, there's a lot to talk about it. We barely only scraped the surface of this topic. So if you have any additional questions, please ask in the comments. I'll probably make another separate video about the cushiest Sovtransavto job, which was being a Sovtransavto buses driver. That's for the foreign tourists, and that's considered the best of the best. This is the best job anyone could dream about in the Soviet Union, being a Sovtransavto bus driver. Thank you again for watching Ushanka Show. Please don't forget to like this video. If you feel generous, you can always use super thanks button to throw some money at me, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.